This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 22 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in air a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, June 3rd, 1911. And I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts a paragraph entitled Baseball. The Westford Athletic Association baseball team has one of the best organizations of ball players in this vicinity and has a good schedule of games arranged. June 3rd at 3 p.m., Chelmsford at Westford. June 10th, Y.M.C.A. of Lowell at Westford. June 24th, Westford at Shirley. July 1st, Westford at Townsend. July 4th, morning, open. July 4th, afternoon, Shirley at Westford. July 24th, Westford at Leominster, Tigers. August 12th, Tigers of Leominster at Westford. Other dates will be closed with fast teams. Address all communications to Alfred W. Hartford, manager, Westford. Next, we have the Westford Center section. A.I. Bicknell, A.I. was a Civil War veteran and fought at Gettysburg, has been inconvenienced by a fractured rib received while at work. His various activities just at this memorial season have now not allowed him much time to rest with it. I believe he was the custodian at these schools in Westford Center. Wallace Johnson, our Iceman of the Cold Spring District, is recovering from a tedious siege of blood poisoning in one foot. Captain Sherman H. Fletcher, beside his many town and business cares, has added to his activities that of a champion rat catcher. He recently caught 16 of the rodents, old and young, in one trap. Probably not all at the same time, though. Patrons of our branch line electrics are reminded that the 745's Sunday morning car has been done away with, but an additional trip added at night, the last car leaving the village at 6:45. This arrangement, it is thought, will benefit more than the former schedule. Mrs. Elizabeth and Mrs. Kate Kebler, Kebler, have been recent visitors at Julian Cameron's. Mrs. Julia Cameron is expected, Julian's wife is Julia. Mrs. Cameron is expected home from her European trip the first of next week. The Keblers are a family that married into the Westford Abbott family, and Mrs. Cameron's maiden name here was Julia Kebler Abbott. Her middle name was Kebler. Mrs. George E. Jenkins of Morristown, New Jersey, who formerly lived here, has been visiting in town, being entertained at Mrs. Alma Richardson's and Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher's. A pretty side issue of last week's dedication of the Whitney Playground was the writing by each pupil of the Frost School a personal letter to Mrs. Whitney, expressing to her, each in their own way, their appreciation of her gift. The letters made up a unique and varied collection and was highly prized by the recipient. The successful carrying out of the dedicatory festival was under the direction of Miss Ruth Fisher, and it was through her suggestion that this original tribute was made. Dr. and Mrs. Orion V. Wells and little daughter, her name was Elizabeth, and she was 2 years old, or about a year and a half old, actually, enjoyed a short holiday last week, going to Amesbury on Friday in their automobile and returning the following day. Reverend and Mrs. Benjamin Bailey stayed at their home during their absence. Mr. and Mrs. Sidney B. Wright have a cat at their house that is something of a champion hunter. Rats, mice, moles, chipmunks, etc., all regular happenings, and twice during this last week, the feline has brought home as trophies a half-grown woodchuck. Next, we have a couple paragraphs on Memorial Day. Good weather and a well-arranged program made our observance of Memorial Day most successful. In order not to make the day too arduous, the veterans had attended to the decorating of their comrades' graves on Sunday afternoon. Geraniums were planted on each grave and a flag placed therein. Tuesday morning, the veterans, sons and daughters of veterans, and members of troop F Cavalry gathered at the Cavalry Association building on Boston Road, that's now number 20 Boston Road, and from there, accompanied by the Nashville Military Band, marched to the beautiful Soldiers Monument presented to the town 1 year ago by Colonel Edwin D. Metcalf of Auburn, New York, in honor of his father's memory, who enlisted from Westford. This is what we now call the Civil War Monument. The monument and enclosed grounds have been beautifully decorated with flags, evergreen, and flowers. After the ritualistic service by the veterans, the line was again formed and marched to the town hall, where the following services were carried out. Honorable Herbert E. Fletcher presided, prayer was offered by Reverend David Wallace, and the address of the day was given by Reverend James M. Craig of Lowell. The musical numbers were furnished by the quartet of the Grace Universalist Church of Lowell and by the band. Their selections were particularly good, and both responded with encores to the hearty applause. Mr. Craig's address was heartily appreciated. A good many were heard to say that it was one of the best memorial addresses ever given in our hall. Mr. Craig deplored the tendency of making this day too much one of sports. Some other good things were that ours is a nation of citizens, not of soldiers, that we must honor our noble men by naming them as men. That's why we read the names of all of our deceased veterans at Memorial Day. He said it was not a war of conquest, but a war of ideas, of convictions, and an intellectual question, later a moral question. Quote, why not free the slaves, end quote. Defeat followed defeat until the president called for a day of fasting and prayer, then victory. The speaker defined the influence upon the nation of this victory, and his closing thought was that the best way to honor the GAR is to fight our battles in the same spirit as they did. The GAR is the Grand Army of the Republic, and it was the Civil War Veterans Association, similar to the American Legion that was formed after the First World War. At the close of the exercises, dinner was served in the hall below to the veterans and their wives, the speakers and singers, the sons and daughters of veterans, and the band. This was in charge of Mrs. Alfred Hartford and a corps of capable assistants. The tables were decorated with white flowers and clusters of flags, and the food abundant and appetizing. At 1:30, there was a band concert on the Common, which was well attended. And at 3 o'clock, a ball game at Whitney Park between Nashua and Westford teams, with a victory for Westford 6-5. This attracted a large and enthusiastic crowd and was an enjoyable feature of the day. The band was in attendance and played numerous selections. Among visitors from out of town for the day were the Fred A. Hildreths of Malden, Mr. and Mrs. Lyman E. Wilkins of Somerville, Mrs. Luke Fletcher, a family group of children and grandchildren at William Sutherland's, Mr. and Mrs. Will E. Carver of Somerville, and Mrs. Gracie Cameron of Somerville. The next section is called Dedication. Saturday, May 27th, will long be remembered by the throng of people who gathered for the dedication of the new park and playground given to the town by Mrs. M. Elizabeth Whitney, remembered by the young people for all that it promises of recreation and enjoyment, and by the older ones who perhaps more fully realize the value to the town's best welfare. The weather, upon which so much depended for the successful carrying out of an out-of-doors affair, left nothing to be desired. It was fresh and clear and much helped by the recent rain. It proved a real holiday for our residents, and there were many gathered from out of town for the event. The morning was taken up by a tennis tournament between the pupils of the academy. Miss Marjorie Seavey won the final honors. This was followed by a ball game between Littleton High School and Westford Academy, and the latter scored a victory of 25-11. That was a baseball game. A luncheon was served at noon to the Littleton guests by the academy students and teachers. At 2 o'clock in the late afternoon, the exercises by the school children took place. There was an appreciative audience of between 500 and 600 people assembled. Seats had been arranged around two sides of the playground. In all of the exercises, the children made a charming picture, the girls in their pretty summer dresses against an effective background of green foliage and blue sky. Music by a Lowell orchestra furnished good music. The march, with some good figures, was participated in by the 160 pupils of the schools and was led by Helen McCoy, who was 13 years old, and Daniel Maloney. This was followed by the Sunbonnet Babies, which included the youngest pupils, and this was followed by the Mother Goose Shoe with Miss Winifred Burnham as Mother Goose and 60 of the children. These two last features were most creditably carried out. The next was the Highland Fling, danced by 9 young ladies. This was done with so much grace and spirit, and was so heartily applauded that it was graciously repeated. Mrs. Marjorie Seavey, Daisy Cabell, Lillian Sutherland, Margaret Sullivan, Maud Robinson, Florence Brewer, May Watts, Lillian Hedman, and Eva Lundberg were those who took part in this dance. The crowning of Miss Ethel Sargent as the May Queen came next, and finally the Maypole dance on the green. The decorative details of these last two features were beautifully carried out. The afternoon was completed for the children by serving refreshments of ice cream and cake provided by Mrs. Whitney. And now this beautiful park of 5 acres of smooth land, recovered from the roughest of swamp and pasture land, known as the Osgood pasture, is an assured fact with its equipment of swings, seesaws, seats, drinking fountain, tennis court, baseball ground, grove, and every convenience for the comfort and enjoyment of the young people. Adjacent to the two schools, as it is, the playground, as you may know, lies between Frost School and what at the time was Westford Academy, but is now Rodenbush Community Center. Only as time goes on will its real value be realized, and the most genuine gratitude goes out to the noble-hearted woman who has made it possible. Harvey W. Tarbell, the landscape gardener of Lowell, has had the work in charge, and the committee for the town was consisted of Herbert V. Hildreth, Oscar R. Spaulding, and Edward Fisher, and all have worked faithfully to bring about a good result. Mrs. Whitney, who has recently returned from an extended Western trip, was an interested attendant on Saturday afternoon. Much credit is due Miss Ruth Fisher, principal of the Frost School, and her assistant teachers, Mrs. Grant, Crocker, and Burnham, and to Miss Josephine Ockington of Lowell, who drilled the scholars in the dancing and marching for the successful carrying out of the dedicatory festival. Among some of the many out-of-town people present were Mrs. Carrie Reed of Barry, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Houghton of Littleton, Mrs. Martha Cooper of Shirley, Miss Ida Prescott of Milford, Mrs. Ida Cummings Allen of Ayr, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Fisher, Mrs. T.E. Barnes, and the Donald Camerons, all of Lowell. Next, we have the About Town section. The town will be interested in the Massachusetts Agricultural College rifle team, to which our own Westford Academy boy belongs, Alistair McDougall. This team is champion in all intercollegiate matches. In 1910, they made a score of 1,848 points out of a possible 2,000, breaking the record and defeating 21 teams. The trophy of Forest and Stream Club of America was defended against 18 colleges, defeating Iowa by 17 points, Columbia by 43, Cornell 95, and Harvard 190. They are still training and winning. The small cottage house of Edmund Whitney on the Lowell Road near Brookside is framed and shingled. When completed and occupied, it will divide the space distance to the villages eastward. This is only a temporary abiding cover until the larger and permanent one is evolved. Elmer Kimball, who lived in Westford several years ago, met with a serious accident in California recently while experimenting with electricity in the line of business he was connected with. One arm was torn off near the body, and he was badly lacerated and disfigured otherwise. The full particulars of the accident have not reached his friends in Westford, but enough has been learned to show that electricity is not a very careful surgeon. Warren Merrill, who for several years lived in Graniteville and was teamster for various parties, died recently in Nashua. His last residence in Westford was at the home of Edward Vinell on the Lowell Road. Among the out-of-town visitors on Decoration Day was Alonzo Falls, an old-time Stony Brook scholar in the days of its large, thrifty school. The writer was a schoolmate with him all the time and throwmate with him in wrestling, about 1-10 in favor of the engineer, who has been in the employ of the Boston and Maine Railroad for 37 years, running most of the time between Boston and Concord, New Hampshire. He has now retired under the rule of pension for long and faithful service. James Manchester arrived on Monday from California. He has 2 sons in town, one living on the Providence Road who has charge of spraying for the state in town. The other son is employed by the W. Johnson Ice Company. They cut the ice every winter on Burgess Pond. It was a large and merry party at the high school dance last Saturday evening. The lively ones from Littleton were in it, as in the days of their seniors. Much net result was gathered for Mind and Pocket. The Academy will not close until about June 30th. This is the latest on record. The usual alumni reception and dance will follow. Music by Hibbard's Orchestra, Lowell. The Westford baseball team called out the reserve of Head and Foot in their defeat of Nashua 6-5. The Fortnightly Club has adjourned until the autumn months for rest and repairs after the serviceable enthusiasm and evolution of its friends and participants. The lightning shower last week knocked out the Stony Brook telephone line, and with it several valuable ideas that were about to take a trip. The line is now in a message transfer condition again, and ideas not knocked senseless by the lightning can start over again. Charles Whitney has a blooded young colt which he hopes will keep down his automobile fever. The next section is called A Vexatious Predicament. During the heavy shower last week Thursday, a junk peddler from Lowell overturned his wheel junk shop on the Lowell Road. The overturn was caused by a contraminded cow tied to the rear of the wagon, who, having spied a pasture with the bars down, made a dash for it, while the driver and horse were dashing towards Lowell in the dashing rain. The horse, drive, wagon, and variety show aboard were dragged towards the pasture, and in the mix-up of opinions as to whether it was to Lowell or pasture they were going, the team was upset, and immediately there came forth ironware, tinware, pewterware, brassware, leadware, ragware, live poultry of all kinds, poultry without feathers, and feathers without poultry. Several roosters started a crowing match, and 2 others started a fighting match. The shafts of the wagon were broken, and the horse went to grass, with the thunder and lightning, dashing rain, crowing fighting roosters, and the ragtime music of the show generally. It was a better show in some respects than the Buffalo Bill upset the day before at Brookside. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending June 3rd, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of Westford Cat for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.